Tonight's share, I'm going to talk about something which probably is the most significant event, certainly of the past week, and that is the demise of Queen Elizabeth II. She died last week, and of course the whole world is basically in shock. And what's interesting about her, there's a lot to say, but is that she probably is the most famous woman in the world. You know, people don't realize how extensive her presence was, you know, because people don't realize what England is. You know, you have England, you have Wales, and you have Scotland. That all forms basically the Britain, Great Britain. But really it's the UK, United Kingdom, and what the United Kingdom is, it's a group of nations that all recognize Queen Elizabeth II as the head of state. I think there are 57 countries that recognize her, the royalty, as the head of state. So her picture is probably, you know, the most famous picture in the world. It's all over. Every Commonwealth, you know, there's Canada, there's Australia, but there's so many countries that are part of the Commonwealth, you know. So every country has her picture on their money, on their documents, and I think every law that they state is a law that recognizes Her Majesty, you know, commands or says and so on. Now, what's very important to understand, so I want to talk a little about that, especially, you know, as a Jewish person, we want to look at something, one, as honest as we can be. And, of course, the world has their illusions, or should I say delusions, about what all this means and so on, you know. They have their way of thinking. But as Jewish people, Torah-observant people, you know, what we always look at is what's the Torah perspective, or what is the perspective from Hashkafa, from the divine plan of creation. How do we view this? You know, the whole concept of a king or a queen, the whole concept of royalty. So I want to talk about that, and also what I think is really significant in terms of what this means, or it could mean, or what is it all about. So I want to talk about that. I think it'll be very, very interesting. So this year is really about, you know, royalty of Britain, the British Commonwealth, the United Kingdom, especially the death of, or the demise of Queen Elizabeth II. And what it means, or what it could mean for the Jewish people and so on. And in a certain way, when you think about that way, it could be really very surprising. First of all, I want to mention, it's interesting, but I remember I watched her coronation. I think she was coronated as queen. Her father died, I think George VI. He was the King of England. I think he died in 1953. I think she was coronated in 1954. And I was a little kid. And I remember watching her coronation on television. You know, I was able to see it on television in those days. That's a long time ago, 1954, I think it was. And I watched the coronation, so which was very interesting. I mean, I remember now, you know, watching it, and it was filled with pomp, tremendous amount of pomp and glamour and glitz, and really steeped in tradition. You know, you saw all the priests. I think it took place in Westminster Abbey. I think that's where it took place. But I remember seeing it. It was really, in many ways, it was fascinating. So I just want to mention that, you know, that I actually saw her being coronated. She was very young. She was born in 1926. She died, obviously, now, and she was 96 years old. I mean, if you think about it, she had an incredible life. Even though she wasn't a real monarch, she was a monarch, but she wasn't an absolute monarch. I mean, when you take a look at somebody who's an absolute monarch, like Louis XIV of France, he was an absolute monarch. And he became the king of France when he was 4 years old. So he is considered, I think, the longest monarch ever. 77 years. That's how long he was a monarch. That's a long time. But he was an absolute king. What's an absolute king? An absolute king is not only a person who can lead, the executive. He actually leads a nation, but he can promulgate laws. They may have a council or whatever, but he can order a person to be killed just on his word alone. Whereas Queen Elizabeth was not a absolute monarch. She was what's called a constitutional monarchy, where the laws of England are made by Parliament. They are legislative body, and not her. But she's assigned. She's got her traditions, and they look to her for leadership, for decisions, but not legislative, for legal and so on. But whatever it was, her monarchy really, if you really think about that, was studded with royalty. I mean, she was royal up and down the aisle, as they say. What's amazing is how much they pay for that royalty. England, England pays, I don't know if you know it, but I think the budget last year for her monarchy to uphold and to maintain her royalty, because she has palaces and castles all over the place. And we know, there's Buckingham Palace in London, then there's Balmoral in Scotland, there's Windsor Palace Castle in London, where I went. I actually was in there, and you can feel the tremendous royalty. But they paid for this. The budget for to maintain that royalty was, I think, 198 million pounds. That's more than $198 million. Maybe it's like $250 million and so on, It's a phenomenal amount of money to maintain this. It's really an illusion of a specialty called a monarchy. And there are many people that say, well, this is ridiculous. What do we need it for? But like I say, it allows the British to have a sense of self, a sense of greatness, because they can always say, we have royalty, we have a monarchy, and therefore look at who we are. It's more an ego stunt than anything else. But whatever it is, it's filled with tradition. I mean, that monarchy goes back a long way, which is really a long way. Most people don't know, but it starts, I think, if I remember correctly, with William the Conqueror, who conquered. He was a Norman, and he conquered England in 1066 CE. That's a long time ago. It's almost 1,000 years ago, and I think she stems from that. But most people don't know that he stems from Germany, the House of Hanover. That's really who she was. Her origins are German. Most people, I think, in England don't realize that. But she stems from the Germans and so on, even though she wants, everybody to believe she's a pure British stock. But in any case, this is who she was. And like I say, she was, she was the model. No question about that. The model of royalty, and you can imagine what kind of life that is. And there are people who spend days, years, they call them royal watchers, who watch the royalty and so on, In any case, she's gone, and I had certain ideas about what it could mean and how it could, contribute to the whole messianic process. And that's what I want to do. Anyway, this year, and before I go on, this year should be a merit for the health and success of the families of Regina Bas Yosef Reuven and Yeshaya ben Yisrael. It should be a merit for the health and success of these families, as I said, of Regina Bas Yosef Reuven and Yeshaya ben Yisrael. In any case, so in order to understand England, you really have to go back, you see, and you have to be honest. Can't be deluded like everybody else is, but you have to be honest in terms of who they are and what they really did and what they really stand for. And then you begin to get a feel of what is going on. In any case, we know that Esav, who's the brother of Yaakov Avinu, right, that the Torah says that Esav became Edom. We know that. And the Gemara says that Edom became Rome, right? Edom becomes Rome. Rome changed and became Christianity, and Christianity becomes Western civilization. So really, Western civilization, I've said this before, Western civilization is really Esav, right? And like the Torah says, we are under the exile, the golus of Esav, you see. Now, I had also mentioned that Esav really has what? Esav has three characteristics. One is gaiva, tremendous amount of arrogance and conceit and hubris, whatever. The second characteristic of Esav is that Esav has mirmo. He's a fraud. He's dishonest. He's an imposter. He pretends to be something that he's not. He pretends to be righteous, a good person, but really very evil. It's all a cover-up. So that's called fraud. Okay? It's called mirma. And the third characteristic of Esav, right, is taiva, tremendous into physical pleasure, tremendous into what's called zimo, geneva, especially ritzicha, murder. That's his favorite pastime. And as such, obviously, very evil person. That's who Esav was. So, as I said, Western civilization is Esav. And mostly the exile of the Jews has been in Western civilization, And therefore, Western civilization is divided into three nations, so to speak, that have those characteristics. The first characteristic, which is the gaiva, I've mentioned quite a while ago, right? The gaiva of Esav is Russia. Russia is the Russian Orthodox Church, but Russia became the worst part of Esav, which is the gaiva of Esav, right? Russia became that under communism. So Russia as communist is the gaiva of Esav. Tremendous arrogance, the atheism of Esav. So that's one. The second aspect of Esav is the mirmo, the fraudulent, the imposter, the pretender of righteousness. And that's Europe. Europe is that. And we see that. I mean, Europe is basically Christian. And Europe has been engaged with wars for an enormous amount of time. I mean, the whole history of Europe is basically a history of wars for 1,000 years, and so on. Not only World War I, World War II, and all the wars between England and France, and, you had Italy, you had Spain, you had the Balkans. It was astounding how many people died because of the fraudulent aspect of Asa, which is represented as I said, by Christianity in terms of Europe itself, you see. And that's a very important idea, you see. Now, if you think about it, the essential aspect of Europe was Britain. I mean, the major nations of Britain, certainly in the last 1,000 years, is England, which was a world power, and then of course you had France. But England was a world power for a long time. You see, in fact, they said this is before England today is reduced in terms of what they were, but what England was for 1,000 years, ever since William the Conqueror conquered Britain. England was a world power. I mean, they said that the sun never set on a British Commonwealth. England, I think the statistic is, England they were in control in the 19th century, right, of 25%, I think that's what the percentage is, of the land mass of the planet Earth. That's how many countries was under England in 1840, 50, 60, 70, especially by Queen Victoria and so on. So England really represents a major, essential aspect of Esav. That's England. So this identifies England in terms biblically, in terms of who they really are, you see. And when you think about that, you take a look at what England did, and I just want to go through some of those ideas. England was involved in what's called colonization. They were into enslaving, maybe that's a very harsh word, but it's true. They try to take over country after country, and they would always proclaim His Majesty. This is what we want. I mean, I'm not even talking about the American colonies that were formerly British. We know that in 1776, America rebelled against England. A great deal of the world was English. It's amazing. They were into colonization. And as such, they were brutal. In order to take over a colony, in order to take over a country and make it, some vassal state, you have to kill people for this. And people are not going to let you walk in and take over their country. So England was engaged in an enormous amount of wars. And wars, we all know, means killing people, murder, which is a terrible sin. Because you think about it, what gives them the right to walk in and try to take a country, by force, right? It's vicious, it's murder, it's Esav. The classic Esav engaging in his popular pastime of murder. That's England. Yeah. I mean, they like to think of themselves as the glory of His Majesty. The English colonies. I mean, they had a tremendous amount of countries that they controlled. You had India, even China, until it was reduced to Hong Kong. China, you had Australia, you have so much of Europe and the American colonies and so on, war controlled, and Africa controlled by England. It's enormous, and so on. And the way they got there, of course, is by killing people. That's how they took over. In fact, it's not only were they brutal in taking over other countries without permission. If you want to take over a country to try to help them modernize, then you need their permission. You can't just walk in, kill the people, and take over. That's exactly what they did. So we're really looking at it, really, in many ways, if we want to be honest, we're looking at a country, right, that represents murder. That's really what it is, if you want to be really honest. That's what they're doing. And they're doing it all in the name of His Majesty, or Her Majesty. I mean, Victoria. She was a queen for many, many years, And whenever they go to war, it's all for the glory of Her Majesty. So we can't get carried away. What you're really looking at is a queen that is a head of state that represents a murderous country. I mean, what is that supposed to mean? You know, and that's the truth. The Queen of England represents, as a head of state, a country that is engaged in bullying people, making them suffer, killing people, making wars. This is what she's a head of state. I mean, is this something to be proud of? Of course not. It's ritzicha. So that's if you really want to think about, that's the truth. And I remember, you know, if I remember correctly, in the end of 70 or 80 or 90, I'm trying to remember, you know, England took over China, and what they did was something astounding. They had China, the Chinese people, they saturated China with opiates. You know, why? Because they wanted to sell them opium. So the whole China was drugged. I think that was called the Boxer Rebellion, if I remember correctly. But could you imagine the Chinese people all drugged? Why? Because England wanted to sell them drugs. What kind of a Mauritius is this, you see? And that's really what England is. It's a murderous country that's filled with evil. So when you look at it and you ask yourself, you know, who's the head of state? And the head of state is either His Majesty or Her Majesty. Is that something to be proud of? You see? Now let's, you know, come up to the last 100 years, and we begin to realize something, that what England did was terrible, incredible evil. You know, they came out in 1917 with what's called the Balfour Declaration, where they said that His Majesty views that the Jewish people should have England, should have Palestine. They call it Palestine, with favor, that the Jews should have a land of their own, which is very nice. That's great. So they had the League of Nations that was the forerunner of the United Nations, you know. So what they did, you see, is they had a conference, I think it was called the San Remo Conference in Italy, I think in 1923, where they proclaimed that Israel should get the Palestine. Now, that included not only Israel, what Israel is today, but I think as part of that declaration, what also was included, what the Jews should get, is Jordan, and they call it Jordan, right? So Jordan was included with the land that was designated for it by the League of Nations. And the League of Nations was a group of nations based on international law, as far as I know. This is the fabric of international law. And they made England, they gave it the mandate to try to carry that out, you see, where the Jews will get Palestine, which includes Jordan, you see. And this was in 1923. What happened? And there's an entire book written about this for those who want to read. Famous book, which was written at that time. It's by a woman, her name is Joan Peters, and she wrote a book called From Time Immemorial. And she goes through the history of Palestine in those days, before Israel became a state. And she documents, tremendous book, she documents what the British did to carry out their mandate. And what's incredible is that the problems that you see now in Israel, all the wars with the Arabs, the whole problem that Israel has now is directly at the door of England. They're the ones who did this. Because oil was discovered, I think, in 1934 in Saudi Arabia or whatever. So the British wanted to curry favor with the Arabs. So what they did is they made a deal. They did several things. Even though they had the mandate to help Israel, the Jews, get back Palestine. So instead of adhering to that declaration, which was the legal declaration of the entire world, see, where the world recognized that Israel should have its place as a nation. So instead, they made a deal with, I think what his name was, Abdullah, which I think is the father of Hussein, of Jordan. They gave him Jordan. That means they took away 80% of the land that was supposed to go to the Jews, and England made a deal with Hussein in order to, and they gave it to him, right, so they could get oil, or they can have access to oil, or whatever, which was terrible. It was a violation of the agreement that the League of Nations did. This is England, right? So they're already betraying the actual declaration of the League of Nations. You see, not only that, not only did they give Jordan away, 80% of what should have gone to Israel is in the hands of Jordan. Jordan did not exist in those years. It was a created state that was given to, like I say, Hussein by England, illegally. Not only that, but they allowed tremendous Arab immigration. Apparently the Arab countries were doing very poorly economically, but Israel was doing very well economically, even though it wasn't really a state. So what the Arabs did is they wanted to all go to Israel, because that's where the money was. That's where the economy was doing great. So what England did, and they were in charge of the immigration, what they did is they allowed Arabs to immigrate, right, to Israel without any real qualifications. If you wanted to come to Israel, you were in, which was illegal, because you're supposed to be giving this land to the Jews. They're supposed to be having this, right? So where do you come off allowing people from other nations, especially from Syria, the Syrian Arabs? Where do you come off allowing that? This is illegal. Yet they allowed Arabs to immigrate to Israel, right? To immigrate, let's say, from Syria, to immigrate into Israel without any real, qualifications or justification. That's where most of the Arabs who lived there, let's say 1920 or 1930, right? That was because of England. And that's what created the problem. You see, why there's so many Arabs in the first place. Because they really shouldn't be there. They were allowed to come. They wanted to come for economic reasons, but the English allowed them in, you see. So that was the second thing that these people did. Jordan was one when they gave it to the Arabs, which was supposed to go to Israel. And the second thing was the Arab immigration, which is really illegal. And then the third thing, which was terrible. What was that? We know that Kristallnacht, which is the night that they broke the crystals, it was the night that Germany declared that the Jews have to be punished, right, in 1938, November 9th, 1938, right? And they destroyed an enormous amount of synagogues, shuls, right? And many Jews were murdered, and they shut the businesses of thousands of Jews or thousands of Jews and so on. It was horrendous. It was a slaughter of Jews. And this happened, like I said, on November 9th, if I remember correctly, 1938, right? And then there was a conference, because then the Germans began to persecute the Jews, right? So there was an Evian conference, I think also 1938, right, where the nation said, look, we don't want the Jews coming to our country. So Hitler saw that nobody really cares about the Jews. So he knew he could get away with murdering or killing the Jews. So what happened? So you would say, wait a minute, if this is what's going to happen, is the slaughter of the Jews, right? So then we have to allow, England should have said, we obviously have to encourage immigration to Israel, because that's really their country, according to the League of Nations, right? And not only that, for humanitarian reasons, It's their country, right? So what England should have said is that, of course, Jews can come to England, right, without any problem. Instead, after Kristallnacht, and I think after the Evian Conference, they issued what was called the White Paper in 1939, if I remember correctly, which forbade the Jews from coming to Israel. Could you believe this? And this is life and death, right? They actually forbade, right, prohibited Jews from coming to Israel. Could you imagine people are being slaughtered by the Nazis? And finally, in 1942, in Wannsee, there was a conference for the final solution to kill all the Jews and so on. So could you imagine that the Jews had no place to flee? Who knows how many Jews died at the hands of the Nazis in יימח שמם because they had no place to run. No country would take them. And there are many, many stories about this, right? And not only that, not only would no country take them, but they couldn't even go to Israel, even though the League of Nations said that this country is specifically mandated for the Jewish people. I mean, this is a life and death of Jewish people. People are being murdered. And you prevent Jews from going to Israel? I'm not even going to the fact that in the Bible, which Christianity recognizes as legitimate, that it says, God says, how many times does it say in the Torah that God is giving the land of Israel to the Jewish people? That the first Rashi in Bereshis talks about that. And that's why the Torah starts with, the creation to show that the world is God and he can give Israel to whomever he wants. So it authorizes and legitimatizes the fact that Israel belongs to the Jews. So England, notwithstanding that they now have no place to flee, right, prevents them from coming to Israel. Who knows how many Jews were stuck in their country? And then, of course, what would happen is Germany would take over different nations. And the first thing that the Nazis, you see, would do is round up all the Jews, take them out, and shoot them, because they have no place to flee. Could you imagine after this that England says you can't come to Israel? And finally, of course, you had the Haganah, not the Haganah, you had the other group of people, who fought them and so on, right? To try to allow the Jews to come in. You had the very famous events, the event of the Exodus, where Britain prevented it from coming to Israel. You're talking about Ritzicha. You're talking about murder, right? England is responsible for untold amount of death of Jews because they prevented it because of the White Paper. Think about that. Now you have to ask yourself, wait a minute. Where's your king? The one who was king at that time, if I remember correctly, was King George VI. Where was this guy? How do you allow your country, right, to issue a decree which means the death of tens of thousands, who knows, maybe millions of Jews who cannot go to a country that's legally mandated for them? Where is this guy? Nowhere. As far as I know, I don't know if he ever said a word about any of this. Now, even if he doesn't want to involve himself in the politics of England, because it is a constitutional monarchy, right? This isn't politics. This is life and death. How could you allow a country that you represent, that does things in your name, right? This is His Majesty's will. How do you allow this to happen? Now, how do you think God looks at this? You think He's fooled by the fact that these people call themselves king or queen or whatever? Of course not. That's the real concept of what is going on, you see. And this is what they honor and cherish. Now, I don't know Queen Elizabeth II. I mean, she appears to be a very decent woman and so on. She had an incredible life and so on. But did she ever come out and apologize what England did for the Jews in the Holocaust? How many tens of hundreds of thousands of Jews died because of the white paper and what England did to the Jewish people? I don't recall such a thing. Maybe I'm wrong, But where is the Queen? How could she not say anything? We're not talking here about politics. Even if, like I say, even if you don't want to engage in politics, okay, this is life and death. This is people dying illegally, which means they should have given Israel, right, Palestine, to the Jewish people. So how could you keep them out? So I don't know. Did she ever make a statement about her country's contribution to the Holocaust, to the death of Jews? It's incredible. And I believe that's why God punished England in several ways. One, she's no longer, one of the great nations of the world. I mean, her spread of influence over the world is gone. What is she? Even if she's a first world nation, she's nothing compared to what she was, 100 years ago. That's the first tremendous diminishment of her power and her status. The second thing, Dunkirk. The Nazis almost killed thousands of British. It was a miracle that somehow they survived Dunkirk and so on, So what we begin to see is a tremendous amount of murder, vicious, of what England did. And even if George didn't contribute to it in the sense that he was responsible for the white paper, but you're the king. And we're talking here about murder. Where are you? Where is your statement? Now, this responsibility of condemning murder, of what England did to the Jewish people, an incredible betrayal to the League of Nations, is the same responsibility to Queen Elizabeth II. Did she ever make a statement? No, I don't think so. I may be wrong, but I don't think so. But how do you do that? How do you condone this? I do know one thing. I heard that she visited in her 70 years as queen, because that's how long she was queen. She visited 120 countries in the 70 years, which is interesting. And she never once visited Israel, not once. Even though she visited 120 countries, and she visited many Arab countries more than once. So could you believe that she never visited Israel out of the 120 countries for 70 years? I mean, what is that supposed to say? You see, and which is, when you think about that, it's amazing. And there's something else even more amazing is Prince Philip, who's her husband, his mother, I think she was of Greek royalty. She was an Oiv Yisrael. I think she's considered one of the righteous of the Gentiles. She actually harbored to protect them from the Nazis. I think it was in Greece, from the Nazis when they came into Greece, killing Jews. I think she actually protected and she sheltered a Jewish family. And I think that's why she's considered one of the righteous. This is Prince Philip's mother. That's the mother-in-law of Queen Elizabeth. And, she's buried in Israel, So she never even visited the grave of her mother-in-law, as far as I know, right? And this is her mother-in-law. This is her husband's mother, her mother-in-law. What is that supposed to mean, you see? Which I find to be actually astounding, you see. This is the way you have to look at it in an honest way. We're not talking here about, making a bad trade deal with Israel. We are talking about not only the Jews took them so long until Israel became part of the Jewish people, but we're talking about that so many Jews died because they had no place of refuge. And this was after Kristallnacht. This was after it became apparent of what the Nazis want to do to the Jews. They still shut down Israel for the Jewish people. A very important point. And I want to tell you something. Man forgets. Man overlooks because he has self-interest. But I want to tell you something. God does not overlook. And God does not forget. Right? The life of one Jew is unbelievably precious. It's infinitely valuable. Right? And to cause the death of one Jew, especially when it's illegal, contribution to murder, right? Who can believe what the punishment is to this country and so on? And I can't believe it's in any way honorable for a woman to represent a bunch of murderers. And that's what they've been doing for hundreds of years. It's not only to the Jewish people, to the whole world. How brutal they were to so many countries that they took over. And they prided themselves. You see, where the greatness of the glory of England, of His Majesty or whatever, or Her Majesty, Queen Victoria and so on, right? God does not forget. This is really, if you want to be honest. But if you want to delude yourself and say, well, the monarchy, it's royal and so on, that's purely delusional and so on, you know. But I have to say, I don't really know her personally at all, obviously. I don't really know much about it. You know, in many ways, she could have been a very honorable woman. She certainly was known as a very decent person, a very nice person, very charming, and so on. So nobody's taking that away from her. I'm looking at the big picture of what happened to the Jews because of a country that she represents. And I don't know if she ever came out and said, we made a terrible mistake, right? Millions or hundreds of thousands of Jews died because of us, and we are responsible for untold suffering of nations for the hundreds of years, right, that we try to colonize many people. Believe me, God does not forget. Now, there is a way also of looking at this, which I believe, that maybe, if you think about that, right, I mean, America is being destroyed by the Democratic Party, of which Biden is really a representative. He's a puppet of the Democratic Party. And hopefully this November, he will be slaughtered in the polls, hopefully, and so on. So what we're really looking at is the fall of Esav, the evil of Esav, the Rash of Esav. And hopefully that will come to an end and begin an entire, messianic process. That's the hope. I believe that it's very possible that the death of Queen Elizabeth II indicates the fall of another major nation of Esav, and that is Britain, right? Because when a monarch falls, it is symbolic of the beginning of the diminishment, right, and the fall of a country. And Britain, as I showed, right, represents the evil of Esav. And believe me, they fulfill that to a T. So it's very possible that the death of this woman, who represents Britain, represents a beginning of a fall of Britain, which is really the fall of the evil of Esav. So it's interesting that together with America, there seems to be the evil of Esav is falling, both in America, the Democratic Party, and in England. In fact, what's even more interesting is that they even have a new prime minister. I mean, I think her name is Liz Truss. She met Queen Elizabeth II 2 days before she died, which is interesting. So the whole government is really, in a certain sense, at a standstill or being really severely curtailed. They have tremendous problems with inflation and energy prices, you see, and labor shortages, whatever. I mean, in many ways, their economy is doing very bad. So I'm wondering if her death is a symbol of the beginning of the fall of this evil of Esav that they have really done. You see, you know. Also, what's interesting to note is she's going to have an incredible levaya. She's going to have an unbelievable burial, you see. So what that does, which is interesting, is it heightens tremendously an awareness of Malchus. I mean, she was the classic, in many ways, queen, empress, of a kingdom, the British Empire, and so on. She represented that. So in her funeral, she all of a sudden increases an enormous awareness of kingship, of Malchus, because that funeral is going to be an incredible funeral. So is it possible that God now wants to make the world aware of what a kingdom is? Right? Why? Because it maybe means that we are about to see very shortly a kingdom of the Mashiach. And therefore, he wants to show you, God wants to show you, let me show you what a kingdom is by watching, how they honor their dead and so on. Because I'm going to bring the Malchus of the Mashiach, the kingship of the Mashiach. And I want to tell you something. There's a Chazal that say, Le'olam heavy ruts, you should always run to see a king of the nations of the world. A Goyish king, a king of a nation of Goyim. Why? So you could see what a king really is, right? And then you'll realize that the kingship, the kingdom of the Mashiach, be 1,000,000 times greater than what you're looking at. Could you imagine what that Chazal says? It says, you can't rely on your idea. No, you need to see what it is to be a king. The honor, the prestige, the glory, the glamour of what it is to be a king. And then look at this and then think, right, that this is nothing compared to the Melech HaMashiach. When the Mashiach comes, his kingdom will be astounding to watch. And we don't even know what that is. But if our rabbis tell us that you should know what it is so you can understand what his kingdom will be like, then run to look at their kings. You see? So in a certain sense, it would be interesting to watch the funeral. You see? Because that will give you a feeling that the kingdom of the Mashiach be 1,000 times more glorious and more greater, which is very interesting. So you can compare it to the Mashiach himself, you see. So that could be another reason why it's happening now, because maybe we are very close to the Messianic era, which I believe we are, and therefore God wants to make the entire world aware of what a kingdom is, what a king or a queen is, the glory of that. So you will understand that the glory of Mashiach will be 1,000,000 times greater, you see. And also, which I think, which is very interesting, you see, is that when you look at what a kingdom is, that is what every Jew is going to be. You don't realize that every Jew is going to be a king, the equivalent of a king. Now, how many Jews really are there, right? There's almost 8 billion people on this planet. That's a lot of people, right? 8 billion. And of those, there's only, 15.5 million Jews? That's less than 1/4 of 1% of the world's population. So in the Messianic era, every Jew will have the same status as Queen Elizabeth, but much greater, right? Every Jew, every Jewess, every male Jew, every female Jew will have the status of a king much greater than Elizabeth was. And when we take a look at what her stature, we say, wow, we gawk at the honor and the glory given to this woman. Yet that's what's going to happen to every Jew, right, male or female, that will be much greater in honor and glory when the Mashiach comes, right? So if you want to understand the status of a Jew at the end of time, in the Messianic era, then watch her funeral, or watch the glory, the glamour, the honor, right, the prestige of this woman. And that prestige is exactly what will be given to every single Jew alive, right? That's what's going to happen. So in a certain sense, maybe this is really why she died now. And I tend to think, look, she could have lived another couple of years. Philip died last year. He was 99 years old. I'm wondering if God took her because maybe she never really said anything to regret what England did to the Jews during the Holocaust. And as the head of state, right, I think what she certainly should have apologized, in terms of what England did to the Jewish people and so on. What a tremendous betrayal of international law, And anybody who wants to read about this, just get a hold of the book by Joan Peters, From Time Immemorial, right? That's the history of the problems that the Jews have today. Is all because of what England did. An absolute betrayal of the mandate of the League of Nations, you see. And tragically, so many Jews lost their lives because they had no place of refuge, which they easily could have had, and that certainly would have minimized the amount of people that died. Any questions?
Rabbi, do you know that I was reading today and it said that she identified...
Can you speak louder?
Wait, you're talking... I can't hear you. Rachel.
Can you hear me now?
No. Take me off speaker.
Rabbi?
Yes?
Say that she
Okay.
her children.
Okay.
Biggest, the best mohel in England at the time. And the reason was that she connected herself to King David. She thinks she somehow descended from David HaMelech.
Yeah, right.
I don't know where
So,
she They said maybe
so Rabbi, okay.
Well, I had mentioned that she's really, it was called the House of Hanover in Germany. She's really of German descent. She's not really English even. Most people don't know that, and they certainly didn't want to advertise it. That they don't even descend from the original British. But she's really of German descent. I mean, she thinks she's from King David. This is all delusional thinking. Everybody wants to be descended from David HaMelech, right? Even Yeshu, right? Even he wants to be connected to David HaMelech because, God says in Yishai, King David, that's where my kingdom will come from. So they all have this delusion. You see.
Rabbi, could I ask
Yes.
you, so then why did Israel then do the flag of England if she was not so great? Why did they acknowledge her death, and why did they do that? Because they have to?
Look, they have to politically. Look, England, Britain is, a major country in the world. Britain is considered a first world nation, So just purely for politics, you need to acknowledge, what she did and so on. But I'm not saying, look, I'm not. She became queen in 1953 or 54. She obviously never had a hand in any of this. My grievance with her is why didn't she ever acknowledge what the British did? They killed, because of them, Jews were killed en masse. And what they did was illegal. And the world continues to think that the Arabs have a say in Israel. Of course not. Most of these Arabs are from Syria that the British led in because that's what they wanted to curry favor with the Arabs. There were very few original Arabs that actually lived there, very few of them. Most of them are immigrants. That's really what it is. Nobody wants to admit this, right? Because a form of anti-Semitism today is to destroy Israel. That's what anti-Semitism is today, you see. And the way you destroy Israel is a two-state solution, which is an insanity. So there is no such thing as a two-state solution. The original occupants of Israel is not the Arabs. It's the Jews. You see, I'm not even talking about the religious idea that God gave Israel to the Jews, but the original occupants are the Jews. The Jews are not occupiers. Of course not. You see, this is a lie that is promulgated by Abbas and all the other anti-Semites that want to use this as a way of destroying Israel. You see, there is no such thing as a two-state solution. You see, the whole thing is a fiction, all of it. That's why if you read this book from time immemorial, you realize what the real story is. Now, Israel has to play along with this, obviously, because Britain is a first world nation, so it's important, And I always find, it's the height of what's called chutzpah, that England that has caused so much misery to people all around the world because they colonized so many places and they were brutal in their colonization. You see, I always find it incredible, right, that they walk around as if they're God's gift to the world. It's unbelievable. Instead of bowing their heads in shame for what they did and admitting, they walk around and they think there's something special about Great Britain. You see, my gripe, I don't really know anything about her. She probably was a very fine woman, But my gripe is that as the head of state for what they did, how could you not take responsibility as the appointed or symbolic head of state? How could you say nothing? When Jews were killed, hundreds of thousands were killed because they wouldn't let them in. That's my grievance, you see.
Okay. Thank you.
But it's for political reasons, obviously.
Right.
They have to play along like everybody else.
Right.
Rabbi.
Thank you. Rabbi,
yes.
Also, there was a big rainbow, a double rainbow.
There was a double rainbow? When?
The day that she passed away, it was completely over Buckingham Palace. Like, it was humongous. It's in every news headline, the pictures. Double.
Really? That's very interesting. That's very interesting. Because I think there's some type of chazal, I don't remember where, but it says that before the Mashiach comes, there will be a double rainbow. So you're saying that on the day she died, there was a tremendous double rainbow over Buckingham Palace?
It's in every single news headline across the world, the pictures.
That's amazing. That's absolutely amazing. So maybe what I'm saying is correct, right?
Right.
So, Rabbi, I have a question. So,
yeah.
If Esav has three characteristics, does all three characteristics, whoever nations those represent, do all three of them have to fall in order for the Mashiach to come?
Yes. So Esav, communism fell, right?
Right.
So that's gone, right? Europe, in a certain sense, has fallen because they are now united as the European Union. So it's really one Europe. The individual nations has fallen. And besides, Christianity in Europe is dying. I heard a statistic that the Church of England 1% of the population of England goes to church. In England. What's the death of Christianity? That's really what's happening. People may profess to be Christian, but they don't go to church. So what does that all mean? You see? And the United States is falling because of, Bob Biden, but Trump is changing the United States. So we are watching a change. You see?
The temptations, the Tava, that represents the United States?
Yes. America is a very pleasure-loving country. You know, America is in many ways a Medina Shel Chesed. You know, it's a country that is really given over tremendously to charity and good works. You know, that's really what America is. You know, and America is into the good life. We know that. You know, they're not into killing people and taking over colonization and so on. You know, America, by and large, is a very good country. It's being destroyed by the Democratic Party, but in and of itself, right, is a very good country.
Rabbi, that
yes.
rainbow was above Buckingham Palace, Windsor Castle, and Victoria Memorial.
What about it? What?
The double rainbow was
over
all those three places all at the same time.
Which ones? Which ones?
Take off your speaker.
Wait, Buckingham Palace.
Yeah.
Windsor Castle and Victoria Memorial.
Wow. That sounds like you hit it right on the head.
3.
Wow. I was not aware of that. It's amazing.
What does a double rainbow mean, Rabbi?
Well, a double rainbow is a sort of like, the rainbow itself is to prevent the mabul, right? The whole concept of a rainbow is a symbol, right, to prevent the mabul from God. You know, it's to prevent, not to remind God, obviously, but to, prevent God from destroying the world, you know. So a double rainbow would be, not only is he not going to destroy the world, but he's going to bring a redemption to the world, which is a permanent way of saying, I will not destroy the world because there will be a redemption. You know what I'm saying?
Okay, so when is this redemption starting exactly?
Well, But I think it's a Zohar that says that before the Mashiach comes, there will be a double rainbow. And the fact that it was over her castles, which is the seat of her power, on the time of her death, is unbelievably symbolic of a sign that maybe that's what it's really all about. Yeah.
Is there a reason why the second rainbow is in reverse, the colors?
Well, you don't mean physically.
No, but when you look at it, the red is on the bottom and not the top.
No, her rainbow, the red was on the top.
No. The first rainbow is like a regular rainbow. And then if you look at the top one, the colors are in reverse.
Oh, I see.
I would imagine. I've never thought about it, but I would imagine. It's almost like the redemption will be of such a way that the arguments for redemption will be total either way. In other words, there won't be any kitrugim. In other words, it's almost like saying the arguments for redemption will be conclusive. So either way you look at it, there's a redemption. That's one way of interpreting. What?
Rainbow appeared as they were bringing down the Union Jack is lowered to half mast. That's when the rainbows came up. I don't know what a Union Jack is. What is that?
Union Jack is the flag of Britain.
So as they were lowering it to half-mast, that's when the rainbows appeared.
Where did it say that?
I'm reading it in the news on Wi-Fi.
Oh yeah. That's amazing. I mean, that is messianic.
Daily Mail.
Daily Mail. That is messianic. Because it tells you what all of this is about.
So bottom line, you think that she died because the end of that reign is gone, and now it's the entering of the Mashiach? Because you can't have two kings at the same time. Like, what's the...
Right, yeah. It's symbolic. That's the end of the Malchus of Esav. Because he has a Malchus. In fact, at the end of Parshas, if I remember, right before Vayeshev, right, it says these are the kings that reigned in Edom before there reigned a king in Israel. You see, and it goes through 7 kings. So that has a lot of Kabbalistic meaning. But what we see is that the end of the kingdom of Esav ends, and then there will be a king of Israel. You see, and this could be the classic example where she dies, and that is symbolic of the end of Esav, the end of the reign or the rule of Esav, and now we can look forward, right, to the kingdom of the Mashiach. Yeah. That's what it says.
So what do you think King Charles will have what do you think his role will be in the divine plan?
Well, I don't really know much about Charles. I do remember that he was filled with tremendous scandal. I mean, if you remember years ago, 1997, Princess Diana, Queen Diana, died, Look, they were both adulterous. He was, he was with another woman, I think Camille. Mm-hmm. And she was running around with some Egyptian Arab and so on, So they were both committing adultery. I mean, what can you really say about that?
Divorced when she was with the Arab.
What was that?
She was divorced when she was with Dodi.
But she was with other men while she was married, Rachel. She was with other men.
Yeah, I like I said, from what I remember, she was still. I don't know if she was still married. I think she was still married to Charles.
Mm-hmm. Yes, she was.
Yeah, she was. I think you're mistaken. But they're both adulterous. I mean, what was the, and there was a lot of scandals. Look, the royal family is filled with scandals. Filled with it. All the children of Diana and Charles, and he himself. I mean, if you go back to many of the incidents in the newspapers, many people laughed at the royals. So what kind of family is this? They're either all philanderers or they're all jet setters, without responsibility. I mean, whatever. They did not have good reputations. What can I tell you? So I don't view Charles as anything serious. Like I said, I don't really know much about him.
But
all I remember is that from time to time, you'd always hear a scandal about the royals.
But not with his son William. His son William.
Yeah, that could be. Yeah, I don't recall any scandal with William. Right. Right. That could be. Yeah.
So, Rabbi, I just want to tell you something. It's Laura and I'm back in Montreal. I went to a Shiva Brachat, and I was telling someone about what I was learning with you. And I didn't even tell her your name. And she said, "Is that Rabbi Kessin? Kessin?" And I go, "How do you know?" She goes, "Because I listen to him all the time." So I just wanted to tell you that. Okay?
Thank you. Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay.
That's good.
Yeah.
Anyway, these are my thoughts about, what happened.
Is there any coincidence also that it's in the month of Elul?
Yes, because it says, there's an argument in the Gemara, when is the redemption going to happen? So Rabbi Eliezer says that the Geula is going to happen in Tishrei. That's number one. And we are, less than 2 weeks from Tishrei. Second thing is Yosef HaTzadik was released from prison in Rosh Hashanah, on Rosh Hashanah. So that's a second very interesting. That means the Gzeira, the decree against the Mashiach ben Yosef, ends on Rosh Hashanah. You see. And the third thing to remember is that this Rosh Hashanah is Motzei Shemitah, is the end of Shemitah. And the Gemara says that Ein ben David bo, Mashiach ben David comes at the end of Shemitah. So you have three ideas why it's very possible that this Rosh Hashanah or Tishrei can be a messianic time, And also the Tafshin Pei Gimel, which is the year, is Tiyeh Shnas. It will be the year of Perek Geula, a time of redemption. So even the Rosh Hashanah are interesting in that sense. So like I say, there's no question that we are getting very close,
One rabbi said, Tiyeh Shana Parnasa Gedola.
Okay. I'll go along with that.
Well, why not?
Why not? But it could be Geula, because Gimel is Geula,
I'd rather the Geula, so...
Right, because with a Geula, anyway, there'll be a Parnasa Gedola, right?
Exactly, yes. We'll take yours.
Yeah, right, Anyway, those are my thoughts, So, like I say, the main idea is that, I don't know who she was really, obviously. I don't know what her personal stance were. But as a head of state, where was this woman? In terms of what England did, What a tremendous betrayal of the mandate of the League of Nations and to the Jewish people, All the people who died, for what? For what reason? Because they wanted oil from the Arabs, so therefore people have to die for that? I mean, we cannot even begin to understand the evil of that country, what that country did, you see.
They're going to get majorly punished when the Mashiach comes, no?
Of course. Of
As
course. Right. Yeah. I mean, the Jews were expelled from England anyway, several times,
So how is it that a Rabbi, Jonathan Sachs, never had a meeting with the Queen to tell her, or to,
I don't know. I would imagine. The problem is when you're in such a place of pomp and so much diplomacy and so much, chivalry and all that kind of stuff. It's very hard to berate a queen. You don't. In many ways, you don't feel it's your place. And look, I can imagine. It's not easy to confront a woman. You have to be tremendously defiant and courageous to do that.
Okay.
I also believe, by the way, that it's a punishment to Elizabeth, that she died. If the Mashiach is almost upon us, then it's a tremendous punishment to her that she does not see the Messianic era. And that's because so many Jews died and she said nothing. Because she is the symbol of Esav.